Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're just going to talk about trying to evaluate if you're in the market for a new splitting axe or maul, what angles are the best, and we'll go over those in a minute. And we've got quite a few hanging up here, and one of the things that I've found out is that if you've got very large angles on the edge of your splitting axe or maul, it depends what angle that they are, but if you've got very large angles in excess of 60 degrees, you will find out that it can be very, very difficult to split timber open. It'll require a lot of hits. Also, if your splitting axe or maul is blunt, it'll even be more difficult. Now, this is especially noticeable in Australian hardwood. When you're using maples or ash or some of the Pinus radiata, this is soft timber, so the angles and the edges of the bevel aren't as critical. But in Australian hardwood, where you've got small fibres that are interlocking, twisted, and especially when they're dry, can be almost impossible to bust open by hand with a splitting axe or a wedge. When they're green, they're a little bit easier because the fibres aren't dried out, so there's a little bit of flexibility with the fibres when they're green. But certainly when they dry out and they're interlocking, they're difficult. Typically grey box is very difficult to split. It's about 15 on the Janka scale. Red ironbark's about 14 on the Janka scale. And it's those short fibres that are twisted and interlocking that hold that log together and make it difficult to split. And always split around the edge of the log, not in the middle, because in the middle is going to be harder. So one way that I can sort of evaluate how much force is required to split open a piece of timber or log, also based on the wedge, the angle of the bevel, is critically important, is that I use a hydraulic press, and we'll just put a picture up here of the hydraulic press. So that's a hydraulic press. It has a dial gauge on it, and you can put a block of timber like that in the press, right? Take your splitting axe or maul, sit it on top, apply the pressure, and you'll find out that it will take so much pressure before the splitting starts. Now, what is equally important, and this is where the beveled edge really comes in, is that the beveled edge will move into the log by a certain depth before it starts to split it. In most cases, what I've seen, you're looking at about between 5 and 10 millimeters of depth. Once the splitting axe or maul gets in 5 to 10 millimeters, it's normally got fractured cracks in it and it's ready to split open. And that's why the edge can be critical. Now, a good example of a splitting axe that's extremely lightweight and very effective for what it is would be the Fiscus range, the X27, the X36, X25. 25 degree wedge and a 30 degree beveled angle of about 5-6 millimeters. With this type of angle, and the Husqvarna that we've got over here is exactly like that as well. It's got a 25 degree wedge on it, and it's got about just under 30 degrees on that beveled edge. Whereas the the Fiscus have roughly got a 25 degree beveled wedge and a 30 degree, it's a 25 degree wedge with a 30 degree beveled angle, but the latest, the X32, they're just a 30 degree wedge. So, and they're razor sharp. And that's why they split so well, because of that geometry. And as well as a Husqvarna. So some of the others, like the Stihl Oxenkoff that you can see over there, that's the Pro splitting axe, and that's the Maul. and the Husqvarna sledge axe there, that's that one there. You really need to get nice, sharp, small angles, beveled angles on the edge of them. With the Spear and Jackson, and you'll see a picture of that later in the video, I brought it with an 83-degree angle, and an 83-degree angle, it just bounced off the timber. I don't have really much softwood here to really test it, but even in softwood, it's really poor design, really is. And the better ones like the Husqvarnas and the Stills, Estwing, that's the Estwing over there, extremely popular. It has a wedged angle of about 40 degrees, and you can see that really sharp angle on there, right on that beveled edge there. That's also around the 40 degrees, that little edge that you can see there, it's machined, and it's razor sharp. So, and there's another one that's extremely popular, the Fiscus Maul, 3.6 kg, with a total weight of about 5 kg. So, all of these splitting axes and splitting mauls are all different in their geometry. And when we put them into the press, if we've got a very, very large angle, it will take much more pressure to bust it open. Now, it normally takes, to bust open a log, let's just say the log's about 6 inches in diameter, and you were using, let's just say you were using this Husqvarna sledge axe here. It's going to take between, say, 400 and 600 pounds of impact to split a 6-inch log open, something around that figure. So, based on the different weight of the head and the geometry, the angle of the bevel and the angle of the beveled wedge, once the edge of the splitting maul or the splitting axe gets into the timber by that 5 to 10 millimeters and it's fractured the log and the splitting process has started, then the wedge, by the force driven by the operator, will split that log open. It's that wedged angle, and that isn't critical. It wouldn't matter if it's 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees. In the case of Husqvarna, and in the case of even Still, I've got the Still AX20PC, that's a same type of very sharp little wedge of around about 25 degrees with a beveled angle on it of about 30. So that's typical of the Husqvarna, the Stills, and the Fiscus. Same type of design, very small wedge, doesn't need a lot of weight, produces a fantastic result, and they're all razor sharp, and that's typically these ones over here. All of them have that sort of wedged angle between 25 and 30 degrees, razor sharp edge. They work really good. So equally, some of these mauls over here, when we go to a maul has generally got a wider wedge because the bulk of the metal, if you're going to bulk the metal up, say to the Fiscus there, that's 3.6 kilo. You can't have a real small wedge on it, because if you have a small wedge, you won't have the mass of metal to make up the 3.6 kilos. So generally speaking, as you go up in weight, the angle of the wedge normally goes up with that accordingly, except in the case of the Husqvarna sledge axe. Very, very narrow wedge, but it's quite long. If you look at the head, it's over about 230 millimeters wide, so it's quite long. So we'll get on to the next part where we look and examine some of these angles and as to why some of them work better than others. So it may make a difference next time that you're going to purchase one based on some of this information that I'm going to present. Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm just going to pop this picture up here in the top left hand corner. This is a picture of the Spear and Jackson, and when I brought that brand new, it was around 82 degrees. Absolutely ridiculous. This type of splitting axe may only work in softwood. All it will do in any hardwood is bounce off it. Now, I did reprofile it, but it came up reasonable. But one of the bad things of the design, let's see if we can zoom in whether you can see that better. One of the worst part of the design is this, that it's just too fat. Way too fat. Reduce the angle quite a fair bit, but it's too fat. It's really only suitable for softwood, and even then, it's just a poor design. Okay, let's have a look at the Husqvarna. The Husqvarna S2800, very popular. It has got a 25-degree edge on it. It is razor sharp. And it's going to go into hardwood. A little bit difficult to see that beveled, that angle. Yeah, a little bit difficult to see. I wonder if I put me... Yeah, you may be able to see it a little bit better now. There it is. Now, that type of angle there is only about around 25 degrees. This angle here is only about 22. But that type of shape, which is also used by Fiskars, will work in anything, soft, hard, or whatever. So, and doesn't have to be reprofiled. Straight out of the factory, it's made correctly. The next one is a Cyclone Super Splitter. It came out of the factory, but it was probably, you can see I've reprofiled, that's the angle there, it's probably just over 40 degrees. So it was probably about 55 degrees. But it certainly works okay. The next one I really done a lot of work on was the Stihl Ochsenkopf. You can probably see by that huge, you can see where that's been reground. Typically when you get this out of the factory, it's only got a couple of millimeters on the edge. So I had to regrind that so that I got a nice wedge shape like that. So this works fantastic in hardwood now. Really does. So that took quite a while to profile that, to get it as good as that. It is razor sharp. It'll work in softwood, hardwood, anything. Now the way that I actually test these is that I've got a hydraulic press. I put a block of timber underneath. I put the axe in the press like that, hold it, and apply pressure and see how many millimeters, or in imperial, 16th of an inch or an eighth, how far that goes into the timber before it starts to split the timber open. I'm not worried about the pressure, I'm worried about how far the wedge goes in before it can split. And if you look at that Spear and Jackson, that's just, it requires way too much force. More than you can swing, and that's why it's so difficult and takes enormous amount of repeat swinging to bust open. Then you get something like this Husqvarna. Now, this is a totally different design. Look at that wedge. Now, that wedge will go in hardwood without any problem whatsoever. Very thin here, gets a little bit thicker up the top here. But that's designed to go into the wood easily, and it does in hardwood. Softwood is really not an issue. Now, here's the Fiskars X32. All as they've done on this has got a 30-degree wedge. There's no 25 degree, it's 30 degree all the way. Comes to a beautiful sharp point. Look at that. No secondary bevel on there whatsoever. And it's razor sharp. And that's why these are so popular. If you're deciding what splitting axe or maul that you're going to purchase next, if you've got hardwood, purchase one that's got a very narrow angle on it, and purchase one that doesn't have a big fat edge like this. Don't get something like this that looks like that. It was worse than that. I'll put the picture up again. There's a picture up there in the corner. You can see what it looked like before, and you can see what it works a little bit better now, but it's certainly this is what I would term as a very poor design by Spear and Jackson. Not happy with that. So the conclusion is, if you've got softwood, you could virtually go out and buy anything. If you've got hardwood and you're looking for a splitting axe or a splitting maul, get one that's got a fairly narrow point on it and doesn't have a big, huge beveled edge on it. You only want a small beveled edge of about 30 degrees. You don't want no beveled edges of 40, 50, 60, 80 degrees. You know, you want it looking like that Fiscus or the Husqvarna. The two Husqvarnas work fantastic. So that's the secret for hardwood. No big beveled angles, because the larger that beveled angle, the more that it's got to penetrate. In all the tests that I did, the wood starts to split after it's got between 5 and 10 millimeters of penetration, and that depends on the angle of the splitting axe or the splitting maul. But roughly, the splitting starts between 5 and 10 millimeters. Once the splitting maul or splitting axe gets into 10 millimeters, then the splitting action and the wedge is the part that splits it open. So it's getting that edge into the timber in the first place, and that's why this is so difficult, because it's got a 10 millimeter bevel, more than a 10 millimeter bevel on it anyway. But it does work. It does work, but it doesn't work as good as, say, something like this. And it certainly doesn't work anywhere as good compared to something like this, because this has got a much better angle suited for hardwood, and it's razor sharp as well. Anyway, I hope that information helps. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.